This month for Noble Sustainability Stories, we're going to switch things up a little bit. We've spent the first half of the year hearing stories of Noble's grads who are involved in sustainability in a variety of industries. We're going to actually chat today with longtime Nobles educator Deb Harrison, who has had such an impact on the science programs at Nobles. Deb has actually been teaching at Nobles since the fall of 1981, and this past semester has been on an incredible sounding sabbatical. So, Deb, first of all, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Kate, thanks for having me.
We would love to hear your sabbatical the last few months. It sounds incredible. Can you tell us what you've been focusing on and where you've been?
I'd be happy to, and I will try not to tell you too much because it's been a real gift as my third sabbatical, especially. I think the sabbatical program is really an extraordinary opportunity. I really love the outdoors. I love surrounding myself with things to think about that are environmentally focused, and certainly sustainability is the heart of that. The first day of the semester, I trotted off with my spotting scope and binoculars, and I went to Duxbury Beach and rambled around on an incredibly cold day in search of a snowy owl because I had decided that's how I wanted to kick it off. It was so cold and windy. Snowy owls were hunkered down. I didn't even see one, and it didn't matter. A week later, went back for snowy owls in a different location up north. And on my birthday, I hung out watching a snowy owl. And I guess that's kind of a little metaphor for the whole sabbatical. I do love being outdoors. I always have. And I love exploring and seeing things that make me wonder. And I think that I continually sort of refresh that, even though it's part of my own hardwiring, by being in awe of how kids, students, younger kids have this just wonderful, fresh, wide-eyed perspective. And kids love nature. There's a lot written about that, as we know. So I've spent a lot of this time just enjoying being in what many people call, my happy place. And I was able to take two trips. One of them was with Noble students. And it was to the island school. It was really sort of the first Excel trip out of Dedham. And I was really blown away and humbled by how invested and inquisitive 15 Nobles kids were, to the point where in the evening there'd be a presentation and the presenter would say, well, it's 9:15. I think we have time for one more question before you go to bed. Kids were hungry, and they were hungry about every aspect of marine science and ocean sustainability, but planetary sustainability and the planetary crisis. And then I got to go to Alaska, which may have been part of what helped you structure that question. And really the purpose of that trip was to embrace exactly what the kids at the island school were embracing and what I treasure about being with kids outdoors. I am a very avid birder, and I am particularly excited about shorebirds, but really all birds, and just the marvel of bird migration, because birds are the planet's most important, I would say, others might not, but environmental indicator, because no other living thing connects all the continents. So if things are going wrong for migratory birds, that's telling us a lot, because they visit a lot of places. And anyway, an epic migration through an area called the Copper River Delta in Cordova, Alaska, just south of Anchorage, is where I went on a roughly 10-day trip. And it is a spectacle of extraordinary annual rhythms. Birds are on the way to the Arctic to breed, which in itself is quite a concept. And this year, I think they had a hard time. It was snowing sideways. It was very cold up there when many of them were trying to nest. But anyway, that's a little overview of this extraordinary time that still isn't quite over until school starts.
So anyone who's taken any of your classes, I was lucky enough to be your student both my 6E year and my senior year. And just from listening to how you spent your time over your sabbatical, it's so clear your passion for land, for the environment, and also for stewardship of this planet. What are some of the influences that you've had throughout your life? What fuels that passion?
Spoiler alert, you gave me that question ahead of time, and I really loved having it because I'm not sure I'd stopped to think about it much. So I think it wasn't as if I had a specific mentor. I think I'm hardwired to have been the kid who just loved being outside, and I got to play outside and got to explore. And I went and found a little series of golden nature guides. I'm holding one up because you can see it. I have a whole series of these that I think I was given when I was 8 years old. And the one that I love the most is the one about birds. And I think I used to draw. I had these watercolor pencils you could draw with and then get them wet with a paintbrush. I love drawing birds and butterflies. So somehow, I was encouraged to be outside, but there wasn't anything really significant otherwise. I think it's probably somehow in my DNA. I don't know. I was taken hiking as a kid a little bit, but not a lot. And even in high school, I will be honest, I did not like taking biology. There wasn't a lot with ecology. Earth Day had happened, some number of years before, not too many, but it wasn't really strong. But when I got to college, I was a biology major. It wasn't like being an ecology major was big, but I would say out of that, it really has informed a lot of what I still treasure. I did take a biology birds course, and the field instructor was the father of the famous David Sibley, who is a very well-known bird biologist and author of field guides. So I think that just somehow it's in me. I don't know. I have, during my sabbaticals, my other two, since then, not as a child, but continued to be really inspired by other people whose passion is driving lifelong commitments that humble me and make me think we all have to do something along those lines.
Well, you've had such an influence, again, not just on our podcast guests, but on so many other Nobles graduates and current students. Can you tell us a little bit about the science program, maybe how it's changed throughout the last few years, and some highlights of how the program does focus on environmental stewardship?
Sure, you're very kind to say that. I am just one speck of sand on the beach where we all do what we do. I do want to make sure I give generous credit to Fred Skolko. When I came to Nobles, he was very invested in modeling environmental stewardship. He had an afternoon program, I think he called the forestry program, and he had kids out in the woods investigating, measuring trees, cleaning up the trails, things like that. But Fred really launched what we have that permeated the classroom as well as just the culture. And at one point he had a program called The Greening of Nobles. And guess what? We didn't even recycle until he launched that, probably in the late 80s. And I would say that if you ask people who were fortunate to know Fred during his tenure, those kids would say that they were deeply inspired by him. And certainly that's something that I think he and I have always shared as friends and colleagues in our goals for why we do what we do. And at any rate, he had an environmental science class. There were no AP environmental science courses at the time. When he retired, I picked up teaching environmental science. And at some point, just kind of during a little prior to my second sabbatical, it just seemed like maybe then was the time to up our game and in the classroom have an AP environmental science course, which we then started to do. That's not to say we weren't doing anything. Fred started the Charles River trip probably about 28 years ago. And we will reinstate that as COVID has allowed us to kind of move forward finally. But again, Fred's passion. Before that trip, he had kids sampling water in the afternoons with him. So I think that we've certainly used the campus. We've used the forest in biology, but we had limited offerings. And it evolved slowly. And I think both in biology and certainly in AP Environmental Science, there is a very strong place-based focus. And there is so much about many different aspects of campus or our watershed, which is larger than the campus, of course, that can drive meaningful engagement. So when kids can, sit and think about something that's really important to learn, they have something real that they actually live every day to teach them about it.
Yeah, our first guest, Alex Janauer, who just graduated with the class of 22, talked a little bit about the Nobles campus footprint and the food programs and sustainability efforts. From your perspective, how is Nobles doing? What's the measurement there?
It's a good question. I think Nobles has been committed for a really long time, and it can get complicated. We have a lot of trees. So do we have solar panels on top of all of our buildings? No, there's some pretty good reasons for that. But I think for a number of decades, and again, I think Fred stimulated this, he got recycling going. We have been living day to day various best practices in sustainable campus life. And Mike McHugh makes choices for us. Steve Ginsburg makes choices for us. There's an energy purchasing, I believe, consortium that the school is part of, which is a little bit of coming out of Steve's office. Probably Mike is connected. There are many, many choices that are made about water use and just the way we treat turf and retrofit, refitting every light fixture with LEDs. That comes out of Mike's office. Food, which I personally consider to be one of the most powerful contexts to teach people about their own responsibilities and just context for learning more about the planet. We all eat. Where's our food come from? What's the impact of our food? Matt Burek is a treasure, and everything that he thinks about every day, he's constantly focused on sustainable choices through his company and has earned us a lot of recognition in his industry, not just within his company. So I think Nobles has done a great deal. It's expensive sometimes to shift. We do not have a hybrid fleet. How realistic is it for us to have done that? It would be really cool. Over time, probably our dependence on fossil fuels for our vehicles is going to change. I think the school does look for opportunities. I think we could take some good long looks at footprint and so on. But I think because of what we've been doing, the opportunities are there to keep trying harder. And I really respect and appreciate the impact of others who are also very committed to this.
Yeah, my next question and sort of the broader question is about not just Nobles, the campus at Nobles, but outside of the quote unquote Nobles bubble. What are some things that, and I'll say two things, what are you kind of excited about? What are those opportunities, especially looking at young people and their education? And then on the other side of that, are there things, and maybe anyone who looked at the New York Times headline or follows this closely, asking you what worries you might be a silly and obvious question, but I think it's important to hear from someone in your position. What are the things sort of at the top of your list that do worry you? So we could start with worries and then maybe go to opportunities to end on a positive note.
Yeah, bad news, good news. That's better, I think. So what worries me? A lot. And I think most people who know me think I'm probably a pretty positive person. And I try to think positively, but not naively about all of this because it is pretty gloomy. My worries do revolve around the fact that we have been talking about this. We, very loosely speaking, many have been talking about this for decades and decades. Right around the time of my first sabbatical, I went to an incredible talk at the Squam Lake Science Center given by a guy named Stephen Hamburg, who at the time was a Brown professor. He was on a Senate subcommittee preparing a report about climate change. And so this is mid-90s. And Stephen Hamburg now is, I think, the chief scientist for the Environmental Defense Council or Defense Fund, EDF, and a really articulate guy. And when he started talking about everything they had to say, that they were including this report, a lot of people in the audience, he was preaching to a choir already. They were there because they already cared and worried even back then. But it was still jaw-dropping. Like, there's no way that can, fires? Wildfires? And I reflect, I took nerdy copious notes, and I think at some point I tossed them out, and I wish I still had them, but they're in my head. He talked about so much that we are living. And it saddens me that we're not stupid. A lot of smart people have been trying to magnify the message. We're still talking about the same stuff, and we're now living it, and we're living a lot of it sooner. And so those are, I could go on, but I think that gives you a snapshot of where my worries come from. I have two grandchildren who are 3 and 6. They love nature, surprise. We spend a lot of time outdoors together. And I don't even want to think about the fact that the birds we watch, the bugs we find when we pick up a rock, or things we do won't be there for them. I try not to go there. I'm going to shift to the positive because it is depressing, but this is a mindset. I try to blend, especially teaching really bright high school kids, especially mostly seniors or juniors in this class. I'm not going to fake it and be sugar-coated and, it's really nothing. I want them to understand how bad it is. But then I also really want them to understand we are adapting. We're still trying to mitigate. Some of our mitigation opportunities are out the window. But there are still options. I do believe in the power of entrepreneurial creative thinking. I wish there were more support for many of those great efforts. And I do believe that things like carbon capture and sequestration are still exciting possibilities. I want to see where we go with that. I think we can. And I really want to believe that we're going to. So I think the good news part, which really, I think you were wondering how I connect that with students. Is that right?
Yeah. How do you see sort of potential within Noble students, recent graduates? And I will include, as a parent of two young children about the same ages, when you look at your grandchildren, sort of what inspiration or what potential do you see in their wonder at the world?
Great. So quick anecdote. I have an app on my phone called Seek. My granddaughter's 6. She's figuring out how to read. She likes to steal my phone, and she likes to hover and figure out what the plant is. So I'll usually say, you can pick 5, and then we're going to put that phone away. So the other day she picked one of the plants that were around in her yard, and it came up as something called mugwort. She sounded out the word. She said, what's that? I said, let's find out. Hit that button. It tells you about mugwort. And it said introduced. She figured out the word. What does that mean? And her 3-year-old brother is all ears, everything that she's doing. He's just completely engrossed with. I explained it was introduced, why it was bad to have it introduced. It was in a garden with mint. And before I knew it, they were yanking it up. Even her brother, stuffing a little dump truck he had with it. He filled it up with mugwort. And I said, where are you going? He goes, to the compost. Wow. So the hopes. I am inspired to keep wanting to do what I'm doing because of moments like that. At Manomet, where I'm very involved, I volunteered this spring doing some curriculum development, but then also working with some school groups who come to visit the bird banding like my students do. And it was kindergartners, first graders, fifth graders, third graders. I walked away from that week thinking, okay, this is good. We're still okay, because kids know so much more. They understand it. They were so curious about so much, just like my grandchildren. And then the Nobles kids, I am so lucky to work with. And I go back to Alex. Alex Janauer in the 9th grade was proud of, in a really great way, what she knew, what she cared about, what she was passionate about. And it mattered to her to tell me about that. That is really humbling when that happens. And because it's not about me telling them what I think is important. I want to go the other way and then say, you know what, I care about that too. And I can think of just kid after kid. I'm not going to even mention other names because Alex is an example, but there's so many kids who've come in and say, I care, and they care more than, ice is melting and the polar bears are in trouble. Well, that is a problem, but they understand a lot more. It used to be that's kind of where they stopped a long time ago, but at least they understood that and worried. So the kids are going off right and left, and it's environmental economics. And if I see kids, they're excited about to tell me. I'm just one person, but that is where our hope is growing and developing and magnifying. And the fact that kids want you to know, not just because you're the teacher, that they care and they want to do something and they want to be leaders, which is why their voices end up in Lawrence on stage. I love talking about this stuff, but it's not up to me. It's up to them, and they own it. So I think we have to cultivate that, being realistic and honest, that it's hard and there are a lot of obstacles. And yet, what are you guys going to do about this? Because you can.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you have a great rest of your sabbatical the last few weeks, and we'll see you in September.
Oh, thank you for sharing this time.